It's time for Speaking of Speaking. Quick tips and tools to take you from stage fright to spotlight. This podcast gives you an inside look from the world of public speaking and speaking secrets you need to be bold from the stage, no matter what business you're in. The host of Speaking of Speaking, Carl Richards.
Thank you, Matt. Matt Soper, our big voice guy who kicks off every podcast. And by the way, we will have Matt on an upcoming podcast. He's a broadcaster here in Eastern Ontario, and he has a great story to tell. Also on a couple of upcoming podcasts, we will have guests from time to time, by the way. One of the ladies I'd like to bring on, her name is Dana Ferrant. Dana she's known as the business dominatrix, I guess is a good way to describe it. I'll tell you, she's helped me whip my business into shape a lot. She's also helped me change my mindset, and she has a very unique model. She has a great story too. She's also a great speaker in her own right, so looking forward to having her on the podcast. Another guest that we'll work on bringing to you, her name is Diana Lidstone. Diana is known as the entrepreneur's GPS. What does a GPS unit do? It helps you get from point A to point B in your vehicle, right? Well, Diana does that for people in business. Doesn't matter how long you've been in business. Sometimes you need help. Sometimes you need somebody to point you in the right direction, and that's exactly what Diana does. She's certainly helped me a lot in my business as well, so looking forward to have her on. So between Diana and Dana and Matt and the other guests that I'm working on, we'll have a great number of people lined up to bring their insights to the world of professional speaking as well. Today, though, I wanted to talk about the 3 Ps to speaking, and maybe you've been scratching your head trying to figure out what those 3 Ps are. If this was a live, interactive podcast, I would say show of hands who thinks they know what they are. But it's not, it's recorded, so let me give them to you. Perception, perfection, and preparation. Perception, perfection, and preparation. Let's start with perception. Because let's face it, when it comes to perception, not only do people have their own perceptions of what a speaker should be, but we have our own perceptions as well as speakers to what we should be providing to the audience and to what we want the audience to not only receive, but what we want the audience to do when we're speaking. So when it comes to people want to listen to someone who is genuine, someone who is interesting, someone who is relaxed, somebody who shows themselves as an expert in what they do. Here's the challenge, though. A lot of us, when we stand up and speak, we focus on more of the public speaking side of things as opposed to just the speaking part of things. Let me tell you what I mean by that. There's this perception of what, and maybe you've thought this before, or maybe you feel this way, or maybe you've heard this. There's this perception or this idea of what a person who does public speaking, how they dress, how they stand, how they look on stage, what tools they use when they're on the stage. And those perceptions aren't necessarily truth. So let me give you an example. There are a lot of people who believe that when you go and speak at the front of the room, you have to stand behind the lectern. You have to stand behind that big box and basically preach or pitch to your audience from that location. Well, actually, that's not true at all. And as a matter of fact, the speakers who connect the best with their audience are the ones who don't use a lectern at all. Here's another misconception or perception about speaking that a lot of people have, and it's that, if you're speaking to an audience, you have to dress the part of a speaker. You have to, if you're a guy, you have to wear if you're a guy, you have to wear a suit and tie. If you're a lady, you have to wear a pantsuit or a skirt or a dress or something like that. Well, that's not true either. As a matter of fact, the world of speaking is shifting a lot to the point where some speakers are getting on stage in blue jeans and a t-shirt. Think of Steve Jobs. I mean, Steve Jobs would get up on stage wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt. That's how he spoke. That's what he wore on stage. Very rarely, if ever, did you see him in a jacket and a tie. So the whole perception of what a speaker looks like and how they act and how they behave is changing. Here's what I'm going to share with you. It's less about the public persona or the public speaking persona more so than it is about your business. and what that looks like, not only to you, but as far as being convincing to your audience, how do you need to come across to them? We have certain perceptions in our mind about what a person who speaks, what they should look like and what they should sound like. Well, the looks part, that's a huge discussion altogether. So there's this huge perception of when you stand on stage and when you speak to the audience, you have to speak like a public speaker would speak. And that's just not true. That's just not true. The honest truth is you will connect with more people when you get on stage if you're not practicing public speaking, but you're just having a conversation with them. If you get it out of your mind that you're not public speaking, not only will you eliminate or work to eliminate that fear of, quote, public speaking, but you'll also learn that, wow, it's just a conversation. And quite often I will share that with people who are nervous about speaking. I'll say, well, why not just go out in front of the audience and just have a conversation with them? Talk to them like they are people, because let's face it, your audience, quite frankly, is just people. They are just people. So if you go in with that mindset of, I'm just speaking to them, I'm not public speaking to them, I'm just having a conversation with them, it'll change altogether, and your perception will change, and you'll be more relaxed. Number 2 is perfection. Perfection. Even on this podcast, I'll be honest, I make mistakes. Now, mind you, it is recorded, so I have the opportunity, if I get lost in my thought, I have the opportunity to edit certain things out, but I do very little editing when I do this podcast because I want this podcast to be real. I want you to feel and get the real me, as opposed to editing every single word and editing out every single breath. I want you to get the real me. Same thing goes with your audience. If you make a mistake, no one really cares about that mistake but you. You magnify that mistake tenfold. The audience, if you make a little flub, they didn't really catch it. Or if they did, they're probably understanding. So let go that stress of being perfect. It's kind of like back in the days when I used to stutter. I guarantee you, that's why I stuttered. Because a person who stutters is actually trying to block their stutter. They're trying to perfect their speech. I used to teach perfection, by the way, in speaking with speech memorization. But the audience typically is not sitting there with a copy of your talk, following word for word, analyzing every single thing you say. So don't worry if you make a little mess up. Don't worry if you make a mistake. Don't worry if you forget something. Remember on a previous episode, I talked about the audience doesn't know what you don't tell them. And audiences don't sit there with a copy of your script and analyze and scrutinize every word that you say. The only way the audience truly knows if you make a mistake is if you tell them you make a mistake. So try to 86 perfection and just go with being genuine and go with being real. And the third P that I want to talk about today is preparation. Granted, you may not be an expert at speaking, but you should be an expert who speaks. If you are a massage therapist and you want to grow your business as a massage therapist, get out there and speak. Take a class if you have to learn how to be a better speaker. Map out your talks. Think of it this way. You wouldn't just start your holidays by driving to the airport, jumping on a plane, not knowing where the plane was going, and saying, hey, I'm on vacation. I mean, you would have a budget, you'd have a destination, you'd know what to expect from that trip, you'd know what clothing you needed to wear. Imagine just jumping on an airplane with a suitcase, and in that suitcase is everything you need for a sunny destination vacation, but you're going to Alaska in the middle of winter. Probably wouldn't need anything in that suitcase, right? And not only that, you'd look foolish, you'd feel foolish. The same thing goes when you speak. You look pretty foolish if you show up unprepared and tripping over your words, especially if you're talking about your business. So give the time you need to prepare and map out your talk. How much time you need, by the way, I'll give you my perception on this. For every minute you're speaking, you should be putting in at least 2 hours of preparation, planning, and practice. At least 2 hours. So if you're speaking for 10 minutes, that's 20 hours of preparation, planning, and practice. You can take more time, and I would recommend that. You can also take less time. If you are a seasoned speaker, you might feel you don't need as much time to plan, prepare, and practice. But I know some fairly seasoned speakers who talk on stages all around the world, and they still put in at least 2 hours. Heck, I know a speaker who puts in 100 hours for every minute he's speaking. But you definitely need to give yourself some time to map out your talk, understand where you're going with that talk, and understand what you want the audience to take away from it. And also, what's your call to action? We'll talk about calls to action on a future podcast. And we'll also talk about mapping out your talk on a future podcast. But give yourself the preparation and time that you need to make sure that you are ready for when you do have to speak. On our next podcast, we'll be talking about getting more speaking gigs, whether they're paid or unpaid, and how to go about doing that. Until next time, it's Carl Richards. Have fun out there in the speaking world and own the platform.
Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Speaking podcast. Fired up about something you heard today? Want to learn more? Be sure to visit carlspeaks.ca. And don't forget to follow Carl on Twitter @CarlRichards72 or join the Facebook group Speaking of Speaking.